My name is Ching. I am a board member of Callister, and I'm also a VP of credit for Synchrony Financial, Synchrony Bank. So the reason we're having this session added to Callister annual conference is because usually Callister annual conference covers mainly trade, relationship, science, and technology. But this year, because we've launched a 3-year program that's we call it CRA program. It's targeting at the helping the low to moderate income group. Then this year we're rolling it out to support small business growth. So that's why we talked to the conference preparation committee, saying, hey, can we add this thing? Because we're very excited for this one, and we're very excited for the panelists we invited here. So so that's the background why we have this session added. This is untraditional for Callister, but it's going to be quite standard going forward, hopefully, as we roll it out small business support. Okay. So for today, the theme we want to do is we want to bring from to support small business. What's the public available resource for small business? What's the private sectors? And we also have entrepreneurs who are startup and has gone through the process. That's Christina. Many people are familiar with her. She is out of our Utah, right? So, but she's the last one to talk, okay? Then Peter Callister, right? He's the CEO of venturecapital.org. He's going to talk more about himself and the organization, but they do a lot of wonderful things, helping the startups with training or access to venture capital to help them get growth, right? Okay. Jevon, he is the director of the economic development of Solid County. It's so good to have him here to talk about from the public. When we invited him, we're thinking from public funding perspective or public program perspective. What's the available resources for us? And actually, some of you know they have a wonderful program. It's a co-op program to support the partnership with different groups, nonprofit. I don't know. So to support low income. So that's our title. Support low income and diverse businesses. They have a co-op program that we actually applied for contract grant for 2023, and we got it selected, right? So among one of the top 5, and it's so amazing. And so that's why Jevon is here. He's going to talk about himself, the program, maybe from a government perspective. If you guys have questions, feel free to ask. Okay. All right. We're going to start with Gibb.
Great.
You probably want to talk a bit about yourself then.
Sure. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Nice to be here with you all today. So I'm the Economic Development Director for Salt Lake County. I've been in this role for about 2 years. I started during the pandemic, which was a weird time to start a new job. And about a month in, that was when we had the second round of the payroll protection program. And for the public sector, we all looked at it and said, hey, we have really low rates of access for businesses of color and lower income businesses. What's going on here? Because the state had this awesome rapid response team that was there to help businesses get PPP and EIDL and all of these grant programs that were out there. There were organizations that said, hey, we are ready to help these businesses. Just make sure that when they come to us, their books are ready and they have all their compliance issues and there aren't any problems. And our response was, that's crazy. That's why there's low rates of access, because people don't have their books organized. They don't trust some of these entities. So we said, let's figure this out. And instead of staffing up within our office, we said, let's work with community-based organizations like Cass Utah that understand their community, that understand the needs, that understand what the barriers for access might be. And we've been working on that for almost 2 years. We've gone through multiple iterations. We've learned what works, what doesn't. We're still learning and excited to learn with y'all next year. But how we have it set up is we've got business outreach partners. That is CAST Utah, it is the Utah Muslim Civic League, the Women's Business Center, the Utah Black Chamber, Pacific Islander Chamber. Again, the idea is they're going to know the businesses, they can talk with folks, they can also translate. So if they go to the SBDC, but there's language issues or they're just not comfortable, they've got an ally, they've got, we call them navigators, they've got that navigator sitting in the chair next to them to make sure things go well. And if they go to that meeting and they say, I didn't like that person or that didn't go well, we've got other resources available. So on the business, we also have business services that we make free or almost free. That includes bookkeeping and financial analysis through Westminster University. So there are students who have literally taken a box of receipts that someone says, this is how I track my money. The students go through the receipts. At the end, they have the business on QuickBooks Online, and they had kind of financial statements, financial planning. They go through the whole process, which is really cool, and then they'll talk with the business about, hey, you've got two options. Either you need to hire a bookkeeper, here's a list of some good folks, or you're going to need to go to classes at Salt Lake Community College, which are free, and it will teach you better bookkeeping processes. That's exciting for us. We have 2 companies that make websites. You can get a free website for your company. We have a program with Utah Microloan Fund where we are paying for them to provide some additional services so that when someone goes to apply, they don't always have the bandwidth to help them when they're not going to get approved for a loan. And this is saying, hey, let's figure out why you're not loan ready yet and get you kind of over the finish line. We just approved a service with an immigration law attorney. So if a business has immigration issues that's preventing their ability to apply for loans, it's holding them up, there's an attorney ready to help with immigration issues. And we have a couple other things. In addition to those paid services that we make free, I think everything is back to free. We had one provider who was charging $20 for the first appointment, and they did it to make sure that people would actually show up for their appointments. But we also work with the things that already exist, don't require our money. So there is the SBDC that someone can go to, but what we're saying is the SBDC is great. We'll help get you that navigator that's going to go there with you and maybe do some translation issues, to go to the Swazo Business Center, to go to Zions Bank for their Business Resource Center, which prepares people for that kind of $250,000 and higher loan amounts. MoFi is a micro lender that works in this market. If you're thinking about international trade, either bringing supply chain here or expanding outside, the World Trade Center Utah is another partner. So really the idea here is, and I'll be really transparent, in Utah, your white male like me is well connected to a lot of resources. Business is a little easier. There's so much social capital there. We want to make sure that every business has that level of access. That every business has a champion there. And our idea is it's going to help everybody. It's not just about helping certain communities, it's helping everybody. The other piece is, as we bring together all of these business outreach partners, you know, the Pacific Islander Chamber can learn from CAST Utah, can learn from Women's Business Center, because all of these navigators are working with so many businesses, and they're also working with services that they can learn, hey, you should go here, not here, because like that service is going to waste your time. This service really created value for us. But it's exciting. And I think the other piece is because you bring together this ecosystem, in the past we saw organizations that said, I want to provide bookkeeping and I want to start up a microloan program and I want to do this and this and this. But nobody has enough money. You know, you've got small organizations that you can't become an expert in everything. So here we're saying all the community-based organization needs to do is understand business, understand your community, and then let's make sure there's a connection to all of the resources. Similarly, for the resources, it's you don't need to become an expert in every community. You just need to be ready to work with the navigators. And the theory is that that this should create a lot of change. I'll say we're learning. It was interesting, and I'll wrap up with this, but in our first year, we were telling our community-based partners, we want to work with a lot of businesses. We know there's a big problem. So, we were tracking by the number of businesses they worked with. We worked with 1,100 businesses in kind of 2021 to 2022. What we learned, though, was people were talking with the business, giving them a couple email addresses to follow up with resources, and saying good luck. Nobody actually got helped. Some people got helped, but I will tell you, I tested it, and I sent my wife to, she runs her own small business. She went to a very well-respected service, asked them some tax questions, and their response was, oh, well, I'm not quite sure I know the answer, but I know a business that's kind of in the same space as you, so here's their phone number, good luck. That's terrible. My wife wasn't going to call one of her competitors to ask them how she should be tracking her taxes. So we changed it, and we said, we're not paying you based on the number of businesses you work with. We're going to pay you to solve problems. So it's not just put a bunch of business names in our database. There's a base level hourly compensation, but then incentives to say, for that first appointment that you have at Swazo Business Center, the organization gets a little bit. But when you go through their bookkeeping program, at the end, when everybody says everything is done and there's a survey from the business that says whether they enjoyed it, that's where the big money comes in. It's been interesting, though, because our numbers went from 1,000 between 2021 and 2022 to 200, which I hated. And I was just like, what, we're doing less? But the issue is we're not doing less. And when I talked with our navigators, they said, yeah, man, last year it was a numbers game. You guys kept putting pressure on us to do more, do more, do more. It takes more time and resources to actually solve a problem. We want to get back up to that 1,000 a year number. I think that's where we need to be. That's our sweet spot. But I think there's a training process, and we're building it out. Excited to see the progress. Really excited to work with y'all this year. And I would say, to this group, we didn't close our application process. So if you know of services that are really valuable to businesses, but businesses might not be able to afford, they can apply to become part of the Salt Lake County Co-op. If you know other community-based organizations, it won't take away from the funding that CAST gets. If we bring more in, the more the merrier. But we're really kind of determined to be able to help all of the businesses in Salt Lake County from startup through mature phase connect with the resources that they need to succeed. And hopefully they kill it, and then they go to Peter to do venture capital and kind of get that next level of funding. But I'll hand it off to you.
Q&A at the end after the three of them talk, but Jevon, how big is your funding?
So we got $4 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding that is available through the end of 2026. What our goal is actually we're spending a little more on the front end. We want to find some replacement revenue so that this is a long-term deal. There's a couple SBA grants, or Small Business Administration grants, sorry for the acronyms, that we're going to go after. And then I'm going to talk with banks like Synchrony to ask about Community Reinvestment Act dollars. Zions Bank is a conversation that we've already got started. But the goal is it lasts forever. I think, we thought about after we got out of COVID, or not out of COVID yet, when PPP went away, we said, well, should we stop the program? Because there's not as much free money available anymore. And it was, well, PPP's gone, but there's still a disconnect with businesses of color, with lower income businesses. So we should continue doing this. And so hopefully we don't have to stop in 2026.
So when you look at applications, do you look at the needs and qualifications or rather, you have a quota for each community per se?
We don't have a quota for each community. It really is, can the community-based organization demonstrate their ability to help a business? Do they understand how many businesses? You know, we can pull census data to say, hey, I want to focus on the Somali community in Salt Lake County. The Somali community is, you know, X thousand people. We think that there's probably, you know, 200 businesses. Of those 200 businesses, I want to serve 50. And so here are my navigators who would try to work with 50 businesses per year. And we would just scale the amount of funding based on that. You've got some people who work with really large communities. The Latino community in Salt Lake County is, what, 23% of the population. But we've also got G.K. Folks Foundation, which focuses on African immigrants and refugees. Smaller population, but they know their community, they know those businesses, and so we just make sure to scale the amount of funding available. They have one navigator. You know, for the Latino community, you know, that organization might have 3 or 4.
Okay, we're going to hold a question, sorry. I broke the rule, I know, but let's go to Peter. Talk about yourself, first then your organization, what you guys do, then.
Yeah, to start, I wondered how many of you know, with a show of hands, what venture capital is?
Depends on what you really know.
So, I'll talk about my organization in a second, but venture capital as private equity is geared towards high growth companies. So companies that usually compete in $1 billion market and want to realize, you know, north of $30 million in sales over a 5 to 7 year period. Most venture capital goes to technology-oriented companies, as those companies to scale. You know, probably close to 60%. About 25% of venture capital goes to life science companies, and so medical devices, therapeutics, things like that. And the balance goes to a lot of things. The biggest group is consumer products. And so typically, before you get to the venture capital level, you have angel investors. And they provide seed capital of anywhere from $1 to $2 million. And the goal between angels and VCs is to return 10 times the amount of money that they give to you back to them over a 5 to 7 year period. And so you can appreciate the growth has to be pretty tremendous. So my organization, we help entrepreneurs tell their story to investors and to make connections to capital. And so we do that by, as we qualify a company that fits within our investment thesis, we match them up with a team of mentors, usually 5 to 8, and we meet with the entrepreneur once a week for about 8 weeks leading up to one of our pitch events to help prepare the entrepreneur to give their presentation, cover all the salient points, and be prepared to talk to investors as they go into due diligence. And so an area of focus of ours is looking at teams that are multi-gender, multi-race, and there's data behind it. When you support teams that have true diversity, they return money about 25% higher. Right? When you bring people with lots of views of how the world works, you're going to foresee problems as they come up and be able to address those. So I've been running the program, our operations program, for the last 7 years. We've been in business for 40, coming up next year. So.
And your experience? Your personal experience?
Yeah, so my background, I came out of school and I ran 2 angel groups. I helped co-found the Park City Angels, get them up and going. There was an angel group called the Olympus Angels that was, you know, a bunch of old white guys that didn't write checks. And so I helped convert them into the Salt Lake City Angels, 2 of the more active angel groups in Utah. I had a consulting business where I consulted mostly technology companies on how to get started, how to really nail the area of market with their service offering. I started a consumer product company called Mommy, where we sell supplements to women who are pregnant and nursing, protein plus a prenatal vitamin. I came back to the organization about 7 years ago, and I sit on a couple of boards.
Christina.
By the way, you have a wonderful newsletter. So venturecapital.org, if you guys just go to the website and sign up for their newsletter. It's a fantastic newsletter of resources and events and opportunities. And I'm really grateful to be part of it. And I believe I actually signed up before I even moved back to Utah. So I heard about you out in Boston, which is incredible. And then I had no idea that you guys were based in Utah. So just a really funny coincidence. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Christina, and give back and support this community here. So yeah, really grateful for everything that Cast Utah has done over many, many years. And there's many longtime members who are here, who've been around for so many years. So it really is a fantastic community, and really grateful to be a central kind of a part of that, starting from when I was a little kid to now. So yeah, my background is I'm an entrepreneur. I founded 2 companies over many years. So I've been running companies for about for 12 years now in my career, which has been great since I graduated from college. And I've raised, in terms of money, it's about funding and money stuff. I've raised over $100 million now. So I think I'm one of the few women of color in Utah that's raised a lot of money. Real venture capital, which has been great, from both big and small, from angel groups, which we start off with, and then going all the way out to the big Silicon Valley companies and stuff like that. So so it's been really, really fun to be able to run these companies and be a CEO. But I'm curious there's a couple people here who are, I'm guessing, under 20 years old in this room. Can you raise your hand? Have you ever thought about starting a company? For anyone? Oh, you have? Okay. Wow. Okay, yeah, that's great. So I haven't. I did. Until I did it. And so my thing was like when I was growing up here, I never imagined being a CEO, starting a company. It was never something. My parents never, told me to do that. Right? They were like, "Oh, go be a doctor. That's the traditional path. Not to become an entrepreneur. That's weird." That and so I spent many years when I started my first company. Spent many years with very little salary, paying myself nothing. And as a, sometimes it's like when you come from a family that doesn't have much, it's a huge sacrifice for my parents as well. And I remember when I first started my company,
the dorm of MIT.
Yeah, so I started in my dorm room. I'm grateful I went to a really good school, but the challenge was that, one, I was in student debt, so I had a lot of loans to pay. And so, there's a lot of situations you'll run into in life where money is really important. And you didn't even realize it, whether you start a company or not. Like, at some point you realize, wait, I need to have a job so I can pay off my loans. And so the first time I ran into this issue of fundraising, surprisingly, was when I interned in a lab in college many years ago, and I was, just doing, just pipetting or something, just really basic stuff in a lab. But at the end of it, this is a really long-term experiment that they've been doing for maybe like 4 or 5 years. It's a really long-term experiment, and I was working with a group of professors and PhD students, and we were almost done with the project. And then, then I said, okay, well, let's write, we should, they wrote up a really awesome paper, and we're like, let's get it published, let's submit this for publication. And they said, oh, well, we just ran out of funding, so we're just going to cancel this experiment at the last minute, and we're not going to, submit it for publication. It's too expensive, and we can't do that. And I said, wow, and so those PhD students worked for 4 years in this lab, and because they didn't have any funding, they didn't have the grants from the U.S. at the time to be able to pursue it further, they had to basically, stop everything prematurely. And that was the first time we ran into an issue of, wow, funding is really important, not just for startups, but even when you're in a university setting or even for large companies too, you're going to run into situations where you're going to need funding, whether from the government, like a grant, or from other corporations and nonprofits, right, that give out grants, or venture capital taking that route. And so that was one area I realized it was just really important to be able to have funding somewhere. But yeah, so I guess I don't know what else to say. One thing I do like to say whenever I speak with anyone, when it's a group of people where it's children plus adults, is just there's no such thing as one career path for everyone, and I think that's really important. I know this is a panel that's geared towards fundraising, small business entrepreneurship, but I will say whatever path you take, whether you do a 9-to-5 job or you don't have a job, you become a parent, a full-time kind of parent, or whatever it is, you travel the world. There's nothing wrong with any career path that you choose to take, so long as you're happy in that path. And so, for me, as an entrepreneur, one is, again, I didn't know I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It's just that I started my company because I was rejected. I didn't get a return offer. I interned at a bunch of banks, including Zions Bank, actually, and I remember they actually fired me, by the way, so I didn't even finish the internship. They fired me during the middle. I was that bad, you guys. usually an intern, you finish the summer, you know, and you're fine. That's the typical path. Zions Bank fired me halfway through the summer.
Zions Bank's lost.
Lost.
It's our Utah's prize. She sits on the board of MIT, and she was nominated by Forbes like 30 under 30. So what a loss for Zions Bank.
No, not at all. You know, sometimes it's like you can be a really good fit for another environment, but you might be a really bad fit for, you know, like for me, if you put me in working in a hospital, I'd do a terrible job. If you put me in Zions Bank, I would do a terrible job. But if you put me to run maybe a high growth startup, with my current company, we provide market data APIs. We're a very technology focused company. You know, that's an environment I do pretty good at, just because I have the experience and the energy in the background to do it. So that was the other lesson, was like that you're not the best fit for everything, and that's okay. You know, in college, I remember all my friends wanted to study computer science. I took CS 101, like the beginner computer science class, and I failed. I got like a C-, and this was like MIT computer science. And I remember thinking, holy crap, my life is over. Like, you know, I can't even pass the most basic class at MIT. But you know, that's the reality of it. I couldn't even pass computer science class. I run a computer company today. Yeah. So, you know, that's just how it goes sometimes, right? So yeah, I did want to mention that, you know. And that's the other thing I realized, you don't have to be the best in the world at everything. You know, but so long as, of course, you hire people who are really good and who are smarter than you, and who, you know, get diversity, what you mentioned, like hiring people who are different backgrounds from you, who have different skill sets. I think that's super important. And so for some reason, it all works out at the end of the day. There's, of course, my teammates come to me for certain things, and then I go to them for other things. So yeah, I really, really appreciate that. But yeah, for me, it's great to be a part of the community.
So now you look back. So what would you wish you would have from public or private sectors, the support from capital side that you can get, that an organization like CAS can do to help, or
Right. You know, like for me, it's not the funding itself. Like funding is always a full-time job, by the way. So fundraising, when you're an entrepreneur, we spend 6 months almost full-time just going out fundraising, flying out to go meet investors and angel groups, and you know, getting grants, applying online to all the different grants and opportunities and accelerators, and there's so many other things you can do as a startup. For me, it's not the funding that I need the most. I feel like it's the community that I really, you know, when I first started my company, I didn't have a community of other founders and entrepreneurs, small businesses that I can talk to, you know, when we have issues, or like, for example, like you mentioned, like, how do you find a good lawyer? How do you pay taxes? How do you find a good bookkeeper? You don't, none of us know, right? And so we just Google around, and then we, you know, discover that the companies that show up on Google, they don't cater to small businesses. Their ideal customer is Zions Bank. It's not like a small startup. And so without the community, then you don't have the resources. And so one thing I did wish was like that we would have a bigger community of people who can be supporters of small businesses, or even if you're just curious about starting a business, you know, to join the community and to ask questions and get some answers and stuff. I think that was for me very important. And now I have the community, which is I'm grateful for. Most of the communities are always online. They're through Facebook, WhatsApp, WeChat, you know, all those communities online, and that's great. That means, but at least having that is
because COVID pandemic.
I think so, yeah. Maybe due to COVID as well. Like a lot of communities became online, which is great. So it makes it a little easier for us based in Utah, where you know the Chinese population is very small, to connect with Chinese people in other communities in California and other bigger cities. Be able to, you know, have more of a connection, because it's really nice as well. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, now questions. You have a question, right? I stopped you. Yeah, go ahead.
I had a few questions.
Okay.
Thank you for it. It's really insightful to hear that what you are doing for the people of Utah and everyone here. But so my first question is for Mr. Gibbs. I was wondering, what would you consider the ideal business or ideal person to apply for your program?
So, if you're thinking about kind of the business that might get assistance, they're not going to work with Salt Lake County. I am working with community-based organizations like CAST Utah to fund them so that they have navigators that work with any business. I don't think it should be competitive people aren't applying to say, hey, can I please have help? It's actually us begging businesses to say, there's help available. Who can we connect with? How do we make this happen? So again, the folks that I work with are community-based organizations that can help us find those businesses. And we do work with business services partners. So that are, folks that provide critical services for small businesses. So again, that's why you get your web design company, your attorney, your kind of bookkeeper, and those folks.
Thank you.
Does venturecapital.org have any accelerator program for?
We started a Smart City Accelerator program last year.
Oh, awesome.
And so it's focused on companies that are based in Salt Lake City that are doing something around quality of life, around healthcare, around sustainability, environment, access to resources. But it's with the lens of we're looking for the ability to scale. But we do offer programs both online and in person around what is venture capital, how does it work, what are some of the terms, and it's really kind of an intro to say, we can go and get a loan from a bank, or we can go and get an investment from private investors. But by having that knowledge, it makes it a little bit easier to empower yourself with options. Optionality, I think, is always can't be undervalued.
I should also clarify what, in terms of scalability, right? That's a really great question because a lot of people here, there's a difference between a small business and like I guess a venture-backed, scalable kind of startup, I guess. So there's starting to become a difference in terminology here. A small business is like, I want to open a cake shop, and I just want to have one cake shop, and that's it for the rest of my life, and it'll make some money every year, and that's great. And that would be what's considered a small business. Whereas a startup that's scalable is something where you plan on opening this in many different cities around the world, and the model can be easily replicated around the world. And the challenge, there's pros and cons to venture capital. I think there's venture capital means that you're taking in money. Usually they invest in not small businesses, they invest in startups that are very scalable, that can be global, very big companies. But again, the 10 times return, there's also a timeline, which we didn't, I didn't know until after I raised money. And then they were like, oh, by the way, there's a 7-year timeline. In the next 5 to 10 years, there needs to be an exit opportunity, which means you need to either be acquired or you need to IPO, or hopefully you don't fail, but something needs to happen there where the VC can get their money back after many years. So consider it as an investment. Whereas sometimes if you're a small business and you get a grant from the government, you don't need to pay back the government in most cases. Or even a PPP loan, you can apply for forgiveness and then you don't have to pay the loan back. And so there's different types of funding out there. And again, as an entrepreneur, it took me a long time to learn it because I didn't have a community to teach me that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's very important to distinguish those differences. But yeah.
Well, I think of it taking debt dollars versus equity dollars is like dating, where you're getting to know someone but you're not committed, versus getting married. You're going to be with that person until you exit or the company dies.
First of all, you're talking about very, very interesting. Then also thanks, Cast, you have this panel. So my question is the diverse business definition, does that include non-profit?
Depends on the program. For Salt Lake County, we did include nonprofits in our definition, but they're part of the economy. So for us, so long as they're providing services, so long as it's just not a way for someone to get income for themselves, it's not a for-profit business, important to the economy. We'd love for y'all to.
So then my second follow-up question is the web design support. I see you follow a lot of nonprofit organizations. That is a really crucial piece for the operation can run, reach out to others.
Yeah, and so that'd be eligible. Talk with.
Okay, good.
She's a 10-year Callister member.
Oh.
Jevon and we were just chatting, saying when we roll out the small business support program, because we are just co-op partner, so we were thinking of for nonprofit organization, because getting the grant is such a critical piece. So I was asking Jevon is like, is there like a resource, right? What's the grant available for nonprofit that's art or just the art or cultural field, right? Maybe we can have a closer session, find what's the resources for grant to this nonprofit, and how to write a grant, and have those folks talk about what they grant the grant, what's the criteria. We can help those organizations to fulfill some of the grant application. Then going forward, right, they can grow. Because nonprofit, right, grant is a major chunk of their income, not even income.
that historically, I think that's been true. But with the rise of big corporations, I think it's becoming a little less true. So my organization is a nonprofit. We don't have owners, and our stakeholder are the people who we serve.
Right.
But there's an organization that just popped up called Ching, and they're trying to provide education for women around finance, around investing, around just moving forward, not necessarily entrepreneurs, but that's a focus, but just people, right? Women specifically. But it's a for-profit company, and the people behind it designed it that way because they felt like if you're going to create something valuable for the community, why not be able to harvest that as an entrepreneur? Whereas I have no upside as a nonprofit employee. I'm just trying to help people, and I have my salary. But there's another company called W Collective, and they're the same. So it's interesting.
Okay, I have a question for Peter. So I know the majority of our community is science and technology background, and I know some members of our community are running some activities, like to get funding from SBIR or NTPR with government. And they could have very effective products right in that. It's always expanding the scale up to the real productive market. So I'm wondering, how do you evaluate a successful product and you want to use it much? So how do you evaluate that? Like, hey, I want to use it value as what you capture, not just small business startup.
A side note from our organization, our founder back in 1983 was an original lobbyist for the SBIR and STTR program. But we view that, my view of the world is you shouldn't raise capital if you can get non-dilutive capital. And so we have a lot of companies who will go through our program and we'll help prepare them to get those grants. Because the government is looking for the commercializability of an idea before they'll fund it. And so we probably have had hundreds of companies that have gone through our program who first raised SBR money and then investment dollars following.
Right. But like I'm working from the government lab, state lab, like my DOE. So actually we are not allowed to have startups. So we have to focus on our research on the market. So I know there are people in the lab who want to move up on that with their skills and professionals. And so for that type of background and what kind of risks do you expect? How to be successful in that.
So which lab do you work for? So most national labs and most universities have an incentive program to spin out technology in the industry, and they'll usually have a program set up with the PIs or the investigators on the project to get a return on that in some way. And so usually the deals are structured where an outside company licenses the technology from the national lab or the university, and the company is obligated to pay royalties. And in my experience, the researcher or private investigator is entitled to about 30% of those. And a good chunk of that goes back to the university.
Does that mean you have to still stay in that to receive that?
Well, it depends. And it's less about the government and it's more about the rules with the lab. And so you have to...
Very sensitive policy, sometimes do have very effects on the situation.
The University of Utah is probably more forward-thinking than most universities on that, where they have a very structured process of how to do it. And I know of researchers who retain a C-level position within the startup that does the licensing, but stays within the lab to do additional research. And from a business model perspective, it makes sense for a university or a national lab to do that, because the researcher can still generate new ideas that can get pushed out and into industry. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Peter, since for CASUTA, right? Chinese Association of Science and Technology. Actually, a lot of our members, they are scholars or student or researchers. So this is a very typical questions. So I've heard there are several. They didn't show up here, but they are interested in commercialize their, whatever they do in their labs. So I think I don't know what kind of help, like if we can connect here, is maybe a specific, panel or session tailored to, this type of, and future entrepreneurs. I think that's going to be very helpful to, the CASUTA can work with, whatever.
Yeah, I'd be happy to participate on a panel like that because I know a lot about that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Unfortunately.
Fortunate for us.
But I'm also available to grab a cup of coffee for anyone who wants to talk about that or wants to brainstorm ideas or get some advice.
Okay. Peter Callister, okay? his name, and I don't know if his email there, but his name is there, but we can give his email out.
Yeah, totally appropriate.
Okay.
It's easy. Peter@venturecapital.org.
So that's actually one of the intentions. We want to bring the resource here, expertise here, just to connect, right? Because we know there's a demand here, and they might turn out really well. So, but what they lack is the connection to capitals and even what to do with it, right? Some basic, education, health support. That's going to be great for the CASUTA members. Okay.
The question for Tim is just what are some of the metrics of success, if any, that you're measured on in terms of that will allow you to get further grants or sustain grants, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it would be really nice if we could track revenue over time and say that, a company that comes through the program ends up getting this multiplier in revenue. The problem is that nobody responds to those surveys that you send out. Like, you can beg them and you're never going to get, especially, I don't have an investment in the company, so they're going to ignore kind of that. So we track it a little differently. This is why we're saying, here are the approved services. Here are the number of people who successfully completed that service. Here is their evaluation. So we can say, like, hey, we've got 100 businesses from these communities in this part of the county that successfully got a new website. They have a 92% approval rating of the website company. And then we'll track and see, and they came back and they got something else. I think if we see that recycle rate, that's something big, but it's something that I'm still trying to figure out because, it's weird being within the government and trying to think a little bit like a startup, where just like, where's my future funding coming from? And just like any business, you've got to be able to show how you create value. So I say, if you have any ideas, we're learning.
Taking a step further, if you're working with a service provider and you go out and you get a loan or you get investment, reporting back that data to the service provider is incredible because it gives organizations like Salt Lake County or my organization the ability to say, this is what we've done. Like, and our reporting efficacy is probably, a quarter maybe, but we struggle to get data.
If they are grantees, they receive, or sub-grantees, receive the service, that should be part of the requirement when they sign up to get the service.
It usually is, but companies don't report. It's just, unfortunately, a reality of my experience.
Yeah, people should vote too. Like, it's just that once they're done getting the service,
right.
Good.
But if they want to continue getting services, it's
Yeah.
better to answer.
And I think that's one of the requirements the co-op program put on the navigators, right? When you work with them, you help them after they get the service, make sure they fulfill the survey, then they disperse, the funds out, So I think that's a good, people usually look at what they start, but they don't look at the maintenance piece, right? Which is actually very important to support
But you also can give the brief to them, say, okay, if your answer you got 5 points.
Yeah,
start.
exactly.
Next time you are in the earlier to get service.
That's why they're smart. They were like, if you do the survey, we'll give you $200 or something like that.
Credit,
right?
something.
Yeah, credit or something. So I think that's a smart program actually you guys did.
Thinking about this, I do think that an interesting thing I heard is that whenever, actually I do think that trying to connect these surveys with like a reward of capital, it becomes from like a moral issue to like, if I fill this survey, I will be helping out the people who have helped me so much in this business, to if I don't take this survey, I will lose $25 or $200. And therefore, I do think it may be helpful that perhaps the Salt Lake government can perhaps help to visualize the benefits of taking the survey to other people who have to potential grantees. And it's like, just like our current vaping campaign, it's not like if you don't vape, we'll give you money, but rather visualizing vaping as a harmful and bad thing to do. And I do think that that can be an interesting way to approach this problem.
It could be, though, the people who didn't get money will respond because they didn't get money, and people who got money won't respond because they have money. So it could be a reverse approach that if 10 people out of 100 respond, 90 got money.
Yeah. Just switching gear a little bit. So, wonder if all of you, including our facilitator, what your views are in terms of the nature of businesses these days that can be successful, right? So, because I think I wish I had the brain power and it's Christina to get into the kind of high-tech and cloud business with big data and such and so forth. But if I didn't, like if I'm thinking about some sort of more traditional type of business, right? Because on one hand, if you think about the high-tech business, on one hand, with cloud computing, you see definitely the threshold of starting a business is lower, right? Because you don't have to have so much capital up front to buy the servers and so on and so forth. But at the same time, the internet business can be very hard as the customer acquisition costs continue to go up. But a traditional brick and mortar business, again, there's its unique kind of risk and so forth. Has it changed? And what do you see these days, both in terms of businesses that coming to you for loans or ventures or any services? Any trend that you're noticing?
Oh, sorry. I'll just quickly say one thing, which is I think over COVID, we've seen a spike in startups getting funding where they help something in the COVID environment, whether it's remote work, which is a great example, or for us, for example, we use a startup for international payroll. So over COVID, because everyone's international, remote, we want to hire employees, let's say in Australia or in China and Singapore, and I want to pay them, I want them to have benefits and their local retirement system, their own 401k, but for their country. And that's a new idea. Before COVID didn't exist altogether, or it was very difficult to do. Now, because of COVID, I can register my employees the same way that I register an international as in Utah as well, by the way. So that's really cool. It's so much easier now to hire internationally. So just ideas like that where because of COVID, it's made remote work more common, and so companies that can help with remote work or can help with hybrid work or can just make this current environment a little bit easier for people, I think is definitely a great idea that's come around in the recent last couple of years. Same with, I think every time there's an economic crisis, right? Whenever, like in 2008, there were a lot of fintech startups that came around, and there were a lot of that kind of sharing economy startups that came around in 2008, like Uber was a great example, where when Uber, it's like Uber doesn't own any cars, but they're like a car company, right? Or Airbnb, they don't own any homes, but they're like a home sharing kind of company. That became very popular, about a decade ago. And then financial technology, because the financial crisis happened, people stopped trusting the banks. And then these fintech companies came around, which are financial technologies. If I want to pay my friends, in my generation, if I want to pay someone back for dinner, I don't pay them in cash. I use Venmo, or in China, use Alipay or WeChat Pay, right? Those are all the past 10 years because of what happened in 2008. And so because of this crisis with COVID and even with current stock market situation, there's going to be many new ideas that are going to come around that we'll never thought of, we can't even think about today, that I think will change our world for the next 10 years as well. But yeah.
If I were starting a traditional business, I would start one that didn't require a lot of employees. That's been the biggest challenge for all of the companies that I've seen in the more traditional business sector. And I would agree with Christina. I've seen tons and tons of deals that focus on workforce automation and replacing people, and that's going to be a trend that'll go on for the next 10 years, even if workforce returns, which presents some different issues.
Does that mean more capital intensive than human intensive?
Yeah, like there was a company that I saw that they're automating the back office of fast food restaurants, like with fryers and devices to cut vegetables like onions and peppers. And I think that you're going to see that more and more, but I think in other industries as well. But I think restaurants in particular, I think Uber's going to stop hiring people, and they're going to have self-driving cars. But it's part of a longer-term trend. But the other area that I've seen a lot in is life sciences, particularly on the therapeutic side. There was so much money that went into the government from government spending to solve COVID. I think from 2016 to 2021, funding for life science companies increased by 4x. From 2020 to 2022, it increased by 3. And so we're going to see a lot of that kind of come out as it gets developed and gets acquired into industry, that there'll be improvements in how we treat people who are sick.
But the life sciences piece is interesting right now because funding dried up so much. Like that market busted. You know, you have folks, what's the spinoff from the U that just located that industry? Yeah, Recursion, growing like crazy. I think they've lost like 60% of their market value over the last year. It was a bubble. And look, it'll go down, and Recursion's a great company. They'll come back, but the market's a little weird there.
They were public at the wrong time.
Yeah, but the other piece, and Kauffman Foundation does some really great research on trends with startups and small businesses. Small businesses their success rate has steadily declined since the 80s. Like we have one of the percentage of small businesses as a part of the total economy consistently down. I think, at some point during kind of the tech boom, everybody was talking startups. And we do have a lot of tech startups, but small businesses getting killed. It is really hard to compete with the ability for somebody to automate and offshore their activities. It just makes it harder for those folks. But there are resources available, and that's kind of the problem that we continue working on, which is just how do you support them in a kind of macro economy that makes it really challenging for someone to start something new, or for a family to keep their restaurant open that they've operated for decades.
It's so tough though for the brick and mortar, those retail businesses. I heard because the rent is getting so high in Utah, right? You probably all noticed rent, housing prices, land, everything is so expensive over the past even year and a half, and because of that, it makes it so much more difficult to start a business.
Yeah, I mean, your restaurants are paying double price for chicken wings. They can't double the price on their menu. The customers will walk away. French fries, huge French fry shortage, avocado shortage. I've got a buddy who sells French fries. If a client calls up and threatens to leave, he says, "Great, thank you. I'll cut you out because I need to be able to sell more French fries to other folks." Like, all the inflation and supply chain issues that hopefully we get under control has made it so hard for small businesses.
Well, you're talking about very interesting. Then also thanks, Casting, you have this panel. So my question is the diverse business definition, does that include nonprofit?
Depends on the program. For Salt Lake County, we did include nonprofits in our definition, but they're part of the economy. So for us, so long as they're providing services, so long as it's just not a way for someone to get income for themselves, it's not a for-profit business, important to the economy. We'd love for y'all to.
So then my second follow-up question is the web design part. I see you follow a lot of nonprofit organizations. That is really crucial piece. Of the operation can run, reach out to others.
Yeah, and so that'd be eligible. Talk with.
Okay, good.
She's a tenured Cascada member.
Oh.
Jevon and we were just chatting, saying when we roll out the small business support program, because we are co-op partner, so we were thinking of for nonprofit organization, because getting the grant is such a critical piece. So I was asking Kevin, Jevon, is like, is there like a resource, right? What's the grant available for nonprofit that's art or just in the art or cultural field, right? Maybe we can have a closer session, find what's the resources for grant to this nonprofit, and how to write a grant, and have those folks talk about what they grant the grant, what's the criteria, maybe help those organizations to fulfill some of the grant application, then going forward, right, they can grow. Because nonprofit, right, grant is a major chunk of their income, not even income.
And historically, I think that's been true. But with the rise of B corporations, I think it's becoming a little less true. So my organization is a nonprofit. We don't have owners, and our stakeholder are the people who we serve.
Right.
But there's an organization that just popped up called Ching, and they're trying to provide education for women around finance, around investing, around just moving forward, not necessarily entrepreneurs, but that's a focus, but just people, right? Women specifically. But it's a for-profit company, and the people behind it designed it that way because they felt like if you're going to create something valuable for the community, why not be able to harvest that as an entrepreneur? Whereas I have no upside as a nonprofit employee. I'm just trying to help people when I have my salary. But there's another company called W Collective, and they're the same. So it's interesting.
Okay, I have a question for Peter. So I know the majority of our community is science and technology background, and I know some members of our community are running small business, like they get funding from SBIR or NTR with government, and they could have very friendly products right in that. It's always expecting the scale up to the real product in the market. So I'm wondering, how do you evaluate a successful product and you want to use it much? So how do you evaluate that? Hey, I want to use it as what you can, not just small business startup.
A side note from our organization, our founder back in 1983 was an original lobbyist for the SBIR and STTR program. But we view that, my view of the world is you shouldn't raise capital if you can get non-dilutive capital. And so we have a lot of companies who will go through our program and it'll help prepare them to get those grants. Because the government is looking for the commercializability of an idea before they'll fund it. And so we probably have had hundreds of companies that have gone through our program who first raised SBR money and then investment dollars following.
Right. But I'm working from the government lab, study lab by DOE. So actually, we are not allowed to have startups. So we have to focus on our research on the life food. So I know that people in the lab, they want to move up on that with their skills and professions. And so for that type of background, and what kind of risks you expect, how successful is that?
So which lab do you work for?
Awkward.
So most national labs, most universities have an incentive program to spin out technology in the industry, and they'll usually have a program set up with the PIs or the investigators on the project to get a return on that in some way. And so usually the deals are structured where an outside company licenses the technology from the national lab or the university, and the company is obligated to pay royalties. And in my experience, the researcher or private investigator is entitled to about 30% of those. And a good chunk of that goes back to the university.
Does that mean you have to still stay in that to receive that?
Well, it depends. And it's less about the government and it's more about the rules with the lab.
Right.
And so you have to...
Very, that sensitive policy, sometimes to do that.
University of Utah is probably more forward-thinking than most universities on that, where they have a very structured process of how to do it. And there are, I know of researchers who retain a C-level position within the startup that does the licensing, but stays within the lab to do additional research. And from a business model perspective, it makes sense for a university or a national lab to do that, because the researcher can still generate new ideas that can get pushed out and into industry. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Peter, since we're CASUTA, right? Chinese Association of Science and Technology. Actually, a lot of our members, they are scholars or student or researchers. So this is a very typical questions. So I've heard there are several. They didn't show up here, but they are interested in commercialize their, whatever they do in their labs. So I think I don't know what kind of talk, like if we can connect here, maybe a specific, panel or session tailored to, this type of, future entrepreneurs. I think that's going to be very helpful to, the CASUTA can work with, whatever.
Yeah, I'd be happy to participate on a panel like that because I know a lot about that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Unfortunately.
Fortunate for us.
But I'm also available to grab a cup of coffee for anyone who wants to talk about that or wants to brainstorm ideas or get some advice.
Okay. Peter Callister, okay? his name, and I don't know if his email there, but his name is there, but we can give his email out.
Yeah, totally appropriate.
Okay.
It's easy, peter@venturecapital.org.
So that's actually one of the intentions. We want to bring the resource here, expertise here, just to connect, right? Because we know there's a demand here, and they might turn out really well. So, but what they lack is the connection to capitals and even what to do with it, right? Some basic, education, help, support. That's going to be great for the CASUTA members. Okay.
The question for Jevon, just what are some of the metrics of success, if any, that you're measured on in terms of that will allow you to get further grants or sustain grants, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it would be really nice if we could track revenue over time and say that, a company that comes through the program ends up getting this multiplier in revenue. Problem is that nobody responds to those surveys that you send out. Like, you can beg them and you're never going to get, especially, I don't have an investment in the company, so they're going to ignore kind of that. So we track it a little differently. This is why we're saying, here are the approved services. Here are the number of people who successfully completed that service. Here is their evaluation. So we can say, like, hey, we've got 100 businesses from these communities in this part of the county that successfully got a new website. They have a 92% approval rating of the website company. And then we'll track and see, and they came back and they got something else. I think if we see that recycle rate, that's something big, but it's something that I'm still trying to figure out because, it's weird being within the government and trying to think a little bit like a startup, where just like, where's my future funding coming from? And just like any business, you've got to be able to show how you create value. So I'm going to say, if you have any ideas, we're learning.
Taking a step further, if you're working with a service provider and you go out and you get a loan or you get investment, reporting back that data to the service provider is incredible because it gives organizations like Salt Lake County or my organization the ability to say, this is what we've done. Like, and our reporting efficacy is probably, a quarter maybe, but we struggle to get data.
If they are grantees, they receive, or sub-grantees, receive the service, that should be part of the requirement when they sign up to get the service.
It usually is, but companies don't report. It's just, unfortunately, a reality of my experience.
Yeah, people should vote too. Like, it's just that once they're done getting the service,
right.
good.
But if they want to continue getting services, it's
Yeah.
better to answer.
And I think that's one of the requirements the co-op program put on the navigators, right? When you work with them, you help them after they get the service, make sure they fulfill the survey, then they disperse, the funds out, So I think that's a good, people usually look at when they start, but they don't look at the maintenance piece, right? Which is actually very important to support.
But you also can give the grade to them, say, okay, if you are answer, you got 5 points.
Yeah,
Start.
exactly.
Next time you are in the earlier to get service.
That's why they're smart. They were like, if you do the survey, we'll give you $200 or something like that.
Credit,
right?
something.
Yeah, credit or something. So I think that's a smart program, actually. You guys did.
Thinking about this, I do think that an interesting thing I heard is that whenever, actually, I do think that trying to connect these surveys with like a reward of capital, it becomes from like a moral issue to like, if I fill this survey, I will be helping out the people who have helped me so much in this business, to if I don't take this survey, I will lose $25 or $200. And therefore, I do think it may be helpful that perhaps the Salt Lake government can perhaps help to visualize the benefits of taking the survey to other people who have to potential grantees. And it's like, just like our current vaping campaign, it's not like if you don't vape, we'll give you money, but rather visualizing vaping as a harmful and bad thing to do. And I do think that that can be an interesting way to approach this problem.
It could be, though, the people who didn't get money will respond because they didn't get money, and the people who got money won't respond because they have money. So it could be a reverse approach that if 10 people out of 100 respond, 90 got money.
Yeah.
Just switching gear a little bit. So, wonder if all of you, including our facilitator, what your views are in terms of the nature of businesses these days that can be successful, right? So, because I think I wish I had brain power and it's Christina to get into the kind of high tech and cloud business with big data and such and so forth. But if I didn't, like if I'm thinking about some sort of more traditional type of business, right? Because on one hand, if you think about the high tech business, on one hand, with cloud computing, you see definitely the threshold of starting a business is lower, right? Because you don't have to have so much capital up front to buy the servers and so on and so forth. But at the same time, the internet business can be very hard as the customer acquisition costs continues to go up. But a traditional brick and mortar business, again, there's its unique kind of risk and so forth. Has it changed? What do you see these days, both in terms of businesses that coming to you for loans or ventures or any services? Any trend that you're noticing?
Oh, sorry. I'll just quickly say one thing, which is I think over COVID, we've seen a spike in startups getting funding where they help something in the COVID environment, whether it's remote work, which is a great example, or for us, for example, we use a startup for international payroll. So over COVID, because everyone's international, remote, we want to hire employees, let's say in Australia or in China and Singapore, and I want to pay them, I want them to have benefits and their local retirement system, their own 401k, but for their country. And that's a new idea that before COVID didn't exist altogether, or it was very difficult to do. Now, because of COVID, I can register my employees as the same way that I register an international as in Utah as well, by the way. So that's really cool. It's so mually easier now to hire internationally. So just ideas like that where because of COVID, it's made remote work more common, and so companies that can help with remote work or can help with hybrid work or can just make this current environment a little bit easier for people, I think is definitely a great idea that's come around in the recent last couple of years. Same with, I think every time there's an economic crisis, right? Whenever, like in 2008, there were a lot of fintech startups that came around, and there were a lot of that kind of sharing economy startups that came around in 2008, like Uber was a great example, where when Uber, it's like Uber doesn't own any cars, but they're like a car company, right? Or Airbnb, they don't own any homes, but they're like a home sharing kind of company. That became very popular, about a decade ago. And then financial technology, because the financial crisis happened, people stopped trusting the banks, And then these fintech companies came around, which are financial technologies. If I want to pay my friends, in my generation, if I want to pay someone back for dinner, I don't pay them in cash. I use Venmo, or in China, use Alipay or WeChat Pay, right? Those are all the past 10 years because of what happened in 2008. And so because of this crisis of COVID and even with current stock market situation, there's going to be many new ideas that are going to come around that we'll never thought of, we can't even think about today, that I think will change our world for the next 10 years as well. But yeah.
If I were starting a traditional business, I would start one that didn't require a lot of employees. That's been the biggest challenge for all of the companies that I've seen in the more traditional business sector. And I would agree with Christina. I've seen tons and tons of deals that focus on workforce automation and replacing people, and that's going to be a trend that'll go on for the next 10 years, even if workforce returns, which presents some different issues.
Does that mean more capital intensive than human intensive?
Yeah, like there was a company that I saw that they're automating the back office of fast food restaurants, like with fryers and devices to cut vegetables like onions and peppers. And I think that you're going to see that more and more, but I think in other industries as well. But I think restaurants in particular, I think Uber's going to stop hiring people, and they're going to have self-driving cars. But it's part of a longer-term trend. But the other area that I've seen a lot in is life sciences, particularly on the therapeutic side. There was so much money that went into the government from government spending to solve COVID. I think from 2016 to 2021, funding for life science companies increased by 4x. From 2020 to 2022, it increased by 3. And so we're going to see a lot of that kind of come out as it gets developed and gets acquired into industry, that there'll be improvements in how we treat people who are sick.
But the life sciences piece is interesting right now because funding dried up so much. Like that market busted. You have folks, what's the spinoff from the U that just located at industry? Yeah, Recursion, growing like crazy. I think they've lost like 60% of their market value over the last year. It was a bubble. And look, it'll go down, and Recursion's a great company. They'll come back, but the market's a little weird there.
Public at the wrong time.
Yeah, but the other piece, and Kauffman Foundation does some really great research on trends with startups and small businesses. Small businesses their success rate has steadily declined since the 80s. Like we have one of the percentage of small businesses as a part of the total economy consistently down. I think, at some point during kind of the tech boom, everybody was talking startups. And we do have a lot of tech startups, but small business is getting killed. It is really hard to compete with the ability for somebody to automate and offshore their activities. It just makes it harder for those folks. But, there are resources available. And that's kind of the problem that we continue working on, which is just how do you support them in a kind of macro economy that makes it really challenging for someone to start something new, or for a family to keep their restaurant open that they've operated for decades.
It's so tough though for the brick and mortar, those retail businesses. I heard because the rent is getting so high in Utah, right? You probably all noticed rent, housing prices, land, everything is so expensive over the past even year and a half, and because of that, it makes it so much more difficult to start a business.
Yeah. I mean, your restaurants are paying double price for chicken wings. They can't double the price on their menu. The customers will walk away. French fries. Huge French fry shortage, avocado shortage. I've got a buddy who sells French fries. If a client calls up and threatens to leave, he says, "Great, thank you. I'll cut you out because I need to be able to sell more French fries to other folks." All the inflation and supply chain issues that hopefully we get under control has made it so hard for small businesses.
Inflation. I went to Costco last Saturday and I bought a package of blueberries for $1.90. And over the last 3 years, that same packet, a smaller packet, has been $3.99 or $4.99. So I kind of wonder if some of the inflation has been I've seen that with other products as well, where I wonder if we're trending in the right direction.
Sure, it's not because it's going to expire soon.
I don't know, for my generation, like people are quitting their jobs as well. They're underpaid. You know, the salaries, they're still, maybe they have the same salary for the past 10 years or something, and it doesn't quite make any sense when the expenses, their rent is twice as much as it used to be, and you know, the cost of groceries is very expensive and everything. So I think that's the other thing, is we call it the Great Resignation. People are quitting their jobs these days and trying to do other things, and it's that makes it also quite difficult as well for companies to hire people even. Yeah, I remember like one of actually our friends in this community, right? He owns Big Eye Poke, and when my brother used to work there, and a lot of my friends work there right now, and my kids work there, yeah. And so I remember he was telling me how it's so difficult to retain employees, because even if he pays them $15 an hour, which seems for you guys, that seems really high, like wow, if I could in college, if I could make $15 an hour in high school, that's a really great salary. But these days, it's just not enough, and so it's very difficult for those businesses, I feel like, to continue and to grow.
So just kind of wrap it up, right? So if I'm one of those great resigning people that I hate, working for a corporate, and yet the reality is small business success rate will continue to decline, where would I start?
Well, I can tell you, like for me, when I never looked at the statistics, to be honest, when I started my company. If I did, I would probably quit. I would probably say, no, look, there's no way, like less than 5% of companies in my industry succeed. Then I'm not qualified, right? I don't have any, when I first started, I had no experience, no background. I didn't have a PhD in my area, and I failed the computer science class. So of course I'm not qualified to do this, but I think what drove me to start the business wasn't the statistics, it wasn't the success rate, or even the promise of like money down the road. It was mainly like, it helped me wake up in the morning. And I was like, this helped me wake up in the morning. It gives me energy and excitement to do this. And so when if you have an idea and you want to pursue it, I think one thing I recommend is set yourself a timeline. Hey, I'm going to work on this for 6 months, and I can budget myself. So throughout the 6 months, I'll pay myself nothing and work on this idea for 6 months. Maybe hopefully find some co-founders and other people who want to work on this with you. And then after 6 months, then sit down and reevaluate. Do I really want to do this? And is the business getting anywhere? And most of the time, half the time you discover, I don't really want to do this, or maybe you discover this business doesn't make any sense. There's already like 100 other solutions that do this, right? Or other small businesses that are competing next door. And so sometimes it just doesn't make any sense. But then I think that helps, at least for me, to go through this path that is very unknown, kind of scary, and even to this day, I feel like my parents are a little worried for me, because they're all, and I told them, I remember I shared with my parents when I raised $20 million for a Series A, and I showed my dad the term sheet, and I'm like, oh Dad, like I raised $20 million, like a Series A, that's a really big deal for an early stage company. My dad was like, okay, but when are you gonna, when are you gonna go work for Goldman Sachs, right? And I'm like, oh my God. Like he's just always so worried and stuff. And I think that will never go away, because that's the generation he grew up in. But again, he's like, okay, so long as you're excited, and I might not understand it, but it makes you happy, so you go do it. I'm like, okay. So, yeah.
I think that's great advice. It's to find an idea, put a plan together, and then figure out where your gaps are. So, if you're building something out and you say, yeah, but I'm not a finance person. All right, let's connect you with the SBDC. Let's connect you with resources. Let's there are things out there. There are grants. Go after the free money. It's hard. If becoming a millionaire entrepreneur was easy, I wouldn't be working for the government. But there are resources to help people, and just make sure. I think, Christina, to your point from earlier, community. It's having those trusted people that can help you figure out what you're going to do for payroll with your international employees. That community is huge. Excited that CAST is kind of moving into that space to be community for this group.
I'd probably start with focus more on the situation that you're leaving and focus more on the situation that you want to get to. Whether that's a job, whether you're starting a company, instead of just jumping and hoping everything's going to be a little bit better, think about where you want to be in that 3 months, 6 months, year down the road.
I think you should ask the same question to Talu for the next panel, because so there's this guy on the next panel who started, he's a Chinese immigrant, and so English is not his native language, and he was able to start one of the most successful companies here in Yutong, scale it. I don't know how many employees they have, probably over 100 employees, and they're very, very big. And just for me, that's so incredible, impressive. Because for me, English is my native language. It's not a problem for me to fundraise, but for him to come to America and to, really pursue the American dream, I think is really cool. So I think you should definitely ask him how he did it, because his situation will be very different from mine and from theirs as well. So yeah.
That's why we have this session one after another. Okay.
I have a question. So we heard there are 2 programs. One is venture capital. You have timeline, you have profit goal there, and we heard the government outreach. So my question for Jevon is, when you outreach, is any small business you will support, or you also have evaluation saying this worth to support, that is not?
Because it's basically any business. So that being said, when you get above 5 employees, you got to hit some other requirements. So if you're a larger business, there's a couple of other parameters. But the nice thing, I'm government nerd and thinking about my compliance rules for American Rescue Plan Act dollars, but in that legislation they said that you can help any business that is experiencing increasing costs or supply chain shortages. So welcome to our economy. Everybody's got increased costs and supply chain shortages. So yeah, CAST will be able to, it's going to be your choice who you work with, but there's
what risk you guys will support? We don't have the government compliance.
So are you going to provide consultation for they have an idea, want to start a business? Is that included in their contract or what they were running? The consultation is not actually given, like they have an idea.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're new to this one. So we only heard the program applied, and after talk to
So what they're going to get connected into is this ecosystem to where, like, if a business is potentially a high-scaling business, they're going to talk to Peter. The navigator's going to know that, hey, go talk with Peter. If it's more of if it's a restaurant, it's going to be, okay, well, you've got some payroll issues, we'll connect you with. And so it's not going to be like, it doesn't become the navigator's job to become the expert in everything. The navigator has to be empathetic to the business, understand what's going on, and make sure that they connect them to the other resources that exist.
The really cool thing about the program is all of these, including my program, have worked in our own silos. We've all been in the same community, but we don't always talk. But having this program, and we're not a part of the Navigator because our focus is so narrow, but everybody knows who we are. We work with the Women's Business Center, we work with the SBDC, we work with Ching, Synchrony. And so all the conversations are happening, but this is just a mechanism where if you come in through UCAS, you may end up somewhere else, right? But it's a big network, and it's a great way for resources not to be wasted.
It's really good. So build the ecosystem or community, as Christina mentioned, you don't have everything, but they're building the community. That's good.
And we're going to get trained by the county, and we're going to stay talking to the county monthly. I think that's the requirement. So if we have questions, if we have, we're not sure, we can, get some guideline with Gumby or Peter, so, we're just the linkage, I guess, right? So whatever was the need there, we'll help them identify the need and pass the need to get the resource to support that. Okay. All right. I'm going to go for the ladies first.
So I have a question. So you talked about you support women, this for example, I wonder if there are resources specific for young entrepreneurs who don't have a lot of experience, but have a lot of energy and really have the drive. So where do they get started? From my observation, I think the mentorship is going to be so helpful to keep pushing them, guiding them, and really give them a full understanding of the environment. So I know in other states there are mentorship programs, but I'm not seeing one in Utah.
Yeah, so the Women's Business Center has a mentor program where they'll assign you to a counselor, and it works similar to the SBDC, where your experience is very similar to your experience is really based on whoever you're working with that consultant. There's also SCORE, which is a national chapter, and they bring in people who have experience to consult small business owners on where they're going, and they all kind of work the same way. By working with different people, different mentors, you get their experience and their biases. Having multiple mentors can help you navigate out those biases that don't make sense for you. And all three of those programs are free.
Are they more geared towards adults or like high schoolers?
Do you know about the high school?
So for high schoolers, something's coming with the Prague Center. So Progressive Lending is starting up a new nonprofit called the Prague Center that's going to focus in that space. I don't think we have somebody else. At that point, they've got to go to the resources that are mostly tailored to adults.
I think that Tech Moms has an initiative
yeah.
where they're focused on women who want to get into technology at the high school level. But if you reach out to me, I can do some due diligence and I can better answer that question. But there.
I will feel like interest in entrepreneurship is rising in the last couple of years, but the problem is that there aren't that many. There are resources out there, but you're gonna have to Google and like find it because sometimes they're just not as you're not gonna hear about it from all your classmates in high school. You know, that's just not a thing. But I've heard the GARD Foundation has a program called Success in Education. I don't know if you've heard of that one. And I think they do provide both a lot of programming and stuff for both high school students as well as college students as well. So that's another program there. There's a lot of like summer camps for entrepreneurship as well. So for example, MIT has a summer camp. You have to apply and get in, but you can apply in. And a lot of them you have to apply for these programs. The U actually I think does have a program as well for entrepreneurs too. So it's about like finding those opportunities and then applying, and then sometimes they're like a 2-week summer camp and they teach you everything and all the foundations. But sometimes, to be honest, the cheapest way to learn is just buy a good book or read some good resources online. My favorite resource is the Y Combinator website. If you want to start like a startup, for small businesses it might apply a little bit, but mainly for like a scalable venture-backed startup. Y Combinator has a lot of resources on their website for funding, how to get funding. They even have a legal document, so if you want to raise a round of funding, you can just print out the document. We literally did that for one of our rounds of funding. We just printed out the document on their website and then hand it to our to their lawyer, and then that way we don't have to pay like a lawyer too much money to do the documents. So that's a good resource there. There's a lot of other websites. In terms of books, though, my favorite book it's called From Zero to IPO. It's by Frederick Harris, who founded a company called Okta. I think the advice in that book is the most relevant today out of all the books I've read so far. So that's my favorite. There's a lot of books on how to start companies, but that one is my personal favorite.
If you want to understand how the venture industry and how venture deals work, there's a book called Venture Deals. It's an 8-hour listen to on Audible. I didn't read it, but it covers everything from how investors are incented, how their funds are set up, how the term works, the difference between control terms and economic terms. It's fantastic. If you want to know about the industry and just the mechanics, I would read that book.
If you're looking for mentorship in this market, I think the Women's Business Center recommendation is good. And then SCORE and a lot of these are located at the Mill, which is the Sandy location. It's the Miller Success Center.
Yeah, we did that.
Yeah, so I mean, you think about because you can get into the Goldman Sachs 10,000 small businesses. They'll kind of graduate you up for different levels of services, but there is mentorship available through them. Peter, what do you think? You're more
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff out there. I would say go to events. There's so many events happening, and I think meeting people and talking to people just outside of your network can be impactful in learning what resources are out there. Because if you're not connected in, and I think that's one of the initiatives with Salt Lake County, is if you're not in the network, if you're not already plugged in, you have no idea what all these resources are. And there's not a rule that you have to be white to participate, you just have to be able to apply.
And that really is. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and that's what Cass is going to work on. There's so much out there. And a good chunk of it is a waste of your time. I mean, it goes back to my wife's example where, like, she spent 2 hours of her day and there was planning and it was a waste of time. So we can, like, there's a phone book of different resources that are out there, and it really is kind of, this goes back to your comment about community. You got to have somebody who you trust who will say, like, yeah, this is the mentor you actually want. That mentor, like, oh, don't do that. And it's just hard, but you know.
And this co-op program is really good because they go through a certain selection criteria. So at least, you know, those service providers, you know, they have certain responsibilities to enroll in the program. So that's probably a good start. But in the meantime, you know, I think you got to do your own research, right? Google, read it, and hear all this talking, then find some good programs. So that's probably a good approach. That's what we do.
Sorry, I've been taking a lot of their time, but also, as I'm sitting here listening to all of this, this is my first time attending an event. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. And I just want to put it out there for anybody interested in learning about venture. Obviously, I work for a local high-growth fintech startup, and I ran our Series C raise. Last year, we raised $300 million, and so I'm very familiar with the venture process. You know, happy to contribute in the community.
That's awesome.
And my question for, again, back to Jevon is, I heard you mention the term Community Reinvestment Act, right? So I heard about that term a few times before. Just a bit of quick Google. I didn't quite get what I want to get to the bottom of it. Like for Synchrony Bank, is there a quota that you get on a yearly basis for that? Like, is there a simple way to understand that?
So the CRA world, I think that's the smart part of the U.S. government. It's like it's targeted at helping the low to moderate income in affordable housing. They improve their financial, you know, status security. So there's under that law, all the financial institutions, they are, you know, they need to do things because the regulators, they do exams and they give them certain credit, including also small business, that's also part of the CRA. So every financial institution has these functions because it's by legal, by regulatory, right? But it really depends on how big your bank is and your size and your what exam rating you want to do. So every bank we do our planning, right? How much, this is my total assets. I want to do maybe 10% of the assets or equity. So I have a plan. Then what I'm going to focus, right? There are different geolocations. There's different, like American Express, they do a lot of like lifetime funds income because it's complicated. It fits their stuff. But Zions, they have a different target. But so each individual bank has their own strategy, and that goes through regulatory. But that's a very good thing all the financial institutions do to the society, to the community, to support, because they get credit from the government, right? So that's motivating them. Like banks, financials, they use money to make money, right? So the government will say, hey, while you're making money, you're getting the money out of the community, you're going to have do something for them, right? So that's the main idea. Then what motivates is the exam result. That's each bank, the only publicly published is their CRA, like satisfactory or, you know, good or need improvement. So if you're in the improvement, you need to do more. Otherwise, if you want to apply, you know, expand your business, you might subject to certain, you know. So it's really like one by one, but as a general practice, you know, banks have this capacity and they want to do more, right? They want to be a good supporter.
But do we know in general if it's a percentage of an asset? What's the ballpark range?
Well, if you're hitting at, you know, like a satisfactory level. You have maybe lower ones, and even higher ones, you want to do outstanding, right? And higher ones. And some of the banks, they don't even, I don't want to do much in CRE because I'm so small, I have other priority, right? I can live on one. But overall, and Utah is very good because there's such a good community. Like the banks has a bank association. We do annual CRE conference, right? Everybody shares. What's your experience? What's your target? So that's, you don't talk to individual or going to those CRE conference. And there's national CRE conference. It's nationwide. But overall, I think it's a government-driven initiative that all the banks are, actively participating to help the community.
And I can't remember the formula, but to Ching's point, each bank takes a very different strategy. So Zions Bank tends to be a little more philanthropic in how they act in the CRA space, whereas Goldman Sachs, they're going to make their target IRR. They're just going to hunt across the country to find an affordable housing, mixed-use development where they can place their dollars. They're not taking a discount. They're able to check their boxes to get a good rating, but everybody takes a little different approach to it.
And like Zions banks, they have a lot of branches. They do a lot of small business lending. So their CRE might gear towards small business loans. Like our bank, we're an online deposit bank, right? We do credit card. So we don't even deal with this one. All we do is we work through different non-profit organizations. We're just investors there, right? So it just varies so much. But if you have a specific area, you have a specific need, you can just look at specific financial institutions. But I don't think there's a general say 10%, 20%. That doesn't work tailored to business model.
Yeah, CRA dollars, some from Synchrony, and they use it to fund our internship program. And we have other monies that come in from other banks that fund different things. And I think sometimes CRA can be used as investment or lending dollars, whereas with ours, it's a donation. And so, but every bank has their own plan, their own rules. It's not hard and fast.
And one example is like 5 years ago, I think the banks in Utah County, we did a EDRL fund, right? So like county chipped in like $1 billion or something, right? Say, hey, I want to bridge the funding gap for high-tech companies in Utah, in Salt Lake County. There are 5 banks chipped in, Synchrony Bank, other banks. So the $7 million, fund, actually, when they start the funds, they think there's a gap there. But as it's rolling out, there's not sufficient applications, companies that meet the criteria. So the funds sit there, there's not application enough. So then there's, write-offs, and the fund essentially, it's still there, Jevon knows, but it's going no well.
Yeah, no, we wound it down. So whereas you were using CRA dollars to cover costs, we were using it in a revolving loan fund. But there's different ways to get at it.
There's different ways to